Hey guys, Lytane here, and let's continue our Steins Gate month with an adaptation of our visual novel in an animated format. This is more common than you might think. A lot of visual novels have good and interesting stories. I mean, they should, that's the whole reason why people buy them and they're sold. So quite a few of these get the animated treatment. So let's take a look at the Steins Gate anime. The Steins Gate anime was released in 2011, made by White Fox. This is based on the visual novel of the same name, but with a reworked script to suit an anime format, so it isn't a one-for-one take of the game. It ran for 24 episodes with one OVA and a special episode released much later. As this is a direct adaptation, the story for Steins Gate is pretty much the same. Ocarina and his friends at the Future Gadget Laboratory accidentally build a time machine out of a microwave, called the Phone Wave, name subject to change, and they start altering time. There are a bunch of silly shenanigans before the consequences hit hard. This is a sci-fi adventure through and through. Now, as this is based on a visual novel, I will be relating some things back to it, but I do want to speak about how the anime stands on its own before doing so. Let's start with the story, which is absolutely great. The core concept of world lines and jumping between them is interesting and engaging. While it does become a little bit complicated towards the end of the show, the bulk of it is actually pretty easy to follow. You send a message into the past and the present changes accordingly. After doing so, everybody forgets. Only Ocarina can remember due to his reading Steiner ability, so we watch the whole story through his eyes. Like I mentioned, there are consequences to all of this though, and that's where the story really picks up. I would say that this anime is split into two parts. The first half, which is 12 episodes, is all about the character growth and the setup. We do get to have fun with these people, learn their hopes and dreams, and really establish who they are and their relationships with one another. Even though these all change with every detail, we can follow along due to them being well written. And, if I'm being honest, a little basic. That is one of the flaws, in my opinion, of the whole story overall. The second half of the anime is where we get all those consequences, and boy, does this get serious. Fewer jokes and lighthearted moments, and a lot more emotion. This causes a massive pacing issue in the show. While the first half is fun, it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. It's well written, but there aren't really any stakes. This paired with Ocarina and his very over-the-top behavior can turn people off the show. The second half breaks that mold, but it has a different pacing issue. It's too fast. As a show, they have a finite amount of time in order to tell their story. The first half is immensely important to set up these characters. I'm not trying to deny that, I just wish they had cut it back by a few episodes, like 2 or 3, in order to give the second half more emotional weight. In the visual novel, there is more time in the second half, or at least it feels like that, because it can take its time. So while the show is still emotional, it could have been more so. They even streamlined the show quite a bit, cutting out a few scenes and condensing them in order to fit the 24 episodes, so it was possible to do this. The animation for the show is also very different from the style found in the game. Hugh has such a strange and unique style in a slightly cartoony way. They have all been normalized for the show, and the new looks are nice, they just don't look as interesting. While I was watching this, I found the animation can be a little bit strange at times. There are lots of awkward shots of people and faces, cutaways during dialogue in order to show something else, and lots of low energy scenes. This is in part due to the origin of the anime. The novel had no movement, well, described movement to be sure, and the majority of it is people talking to each other because it's a visual novel. This makes doing scenes a little bit more challenging in order to keep people engaged, and I felt at times that it wasn't handled very well. Also, there's this odd sequence where Ocarina thinks something bad has happened to Mayuri, and it's the only one in this style, and it just really took me out of the moment. I don't get why they did this. What does help with all these scenes though is the music. The soundtrack is composed by Takeshi Abo, who did the game, so you know it's going to be on point. He wrote a few new tracks for the show and rearranged others to better fit the scenes. It's all done masterfully. It's just great. Unlike the sound design, this was really hit and miss for me. Some scenes are so quiet without any human sounds, and others are clunky. The worst one is when Kirisu is talking to Ocarina in the park. It is a very serious scene and has so much emotion that clunk, clunk, clunk as she walks off the slide. It shocked me and it took me right out of the moment. But most of the time it's alright, just some scenes like that here and there. The last thing sound-wise are the voice actors, and I watched the show mostly in English, don't judge me, for the novelty of it, because the game is all in Japanese, and they do a serviceable job, okay? Ocarina as the main character is also the hardest to pull off with his overacting style and strange behavior. Jay Tatum really does try, but he just can't nail the Ho in Kioma persona well. Aside from him, Moeka isn't as breathy in English and sounds too, well, normal. Daru isn't very good in English, and it's strange because in Japanese, they have the same voice actor, but he does a different voice for the anime? I don't get it. In fact, most of the cast from the game reprise their roles for the anime, which I love. It keeps it consistent. Even though I watched most of the show in English, I had the subtitles turned on for the official translation, and I'll say that sometimes the English had better lines and interpretations. Other times it's better in the translation, so really any way that you want to watch it is equally good and you will get the same story. The only really major change between the two languages are some of the slang words they use and the more western and nerdy geeky stuff and pop culture references, but they did a good job in both, honestly. Now, from here on out, I want to talk about the show in relation to the game, directly comparing it, but if you just want to see my final thoughts on the anime, you can skip to this time. Let's get into some of the streamlining that I mentioned earlier. This is a show and it has a much shorter span of time to tell a story. As such, some scenes are either cut or shortened, or rushed in some cases, in order to get the important things out. A lot of the time travel theories at the start are cut down and simplified, same as the parties and the scenes hanging out in the lab. These changes are fine and help keep the pace of the show. Like the first time Ocarina time leaps by sending his memory back in time. In the game, he doesn't believe it after it happens and just has a sense of deja vu. Here, they cut that out completely and get onto the part where he understands what's going on. Much better. For the most part, Ocarina's inner monologue is cut. Sometimes we will hear his thoughts to better convey what's going on, but mostly it's a visual thing, so most of the descriptions are gone. For the better, I say. It really streamlines a show. Some scenes have been extended and fleshed out more here though. They mostly have to do with the chase and action scenes. They are certainly handled better in the show than the novel because we can see what's happening. So a little more time is spent with Suzuha doing her fighting. The 70 million years ago flashback scene was redone for the show and it makes more, or kinda less sense than the visual novel. It's really strange scene, but it's better than the game's version, in my opinion. There are also some very big changes, both good and bad, and one kinda neutral. The neutral one is Luca being called Ruka in the show. L's and R's are strange in Japanese, so the English translation went with Ruka. They also misspell kangaroo with a C instead of a K, but whatever. Big stuff are the new scenes. As the novel is all through Ocarina's point of view, we don't see other characters and what they're doing. While the show does have some of that, it isn't often we get to see these extra scenes, but it does help build up those characters. I really liked when Mayuri was showing Moeka around the lab and just being her friend. It's really nice. These are the best additions to the show in my opinion. They also took out some scenes. The Farah storyline is cut down quite a lot. 4 degrees Celsius is cut and that subplot is regulated to a few sentences. Honestly, I don't mind. The subplot wasn't all that interesting, but it does mean less Faris, so that does suck. In fact, all the characters get this treatment. The Faris, Ruka, and Suzuha episodes are crammed into a single episode each, so the time Ocarina and Ruka spend together is a single day instead of the 2 to 3 that was in the game. I had an issue with this because they felt a little bit rushed and didn't have the weight that they did have in the game. Ruka was the most emotional ending for me in the game, and she was definitely the most boring one in the show. Moeka's story gets 2 episodes, which does make it have more time, but then they changed how it ends. In the game, it's implied that she was cut off from her friends, it's hard to say without spoilers, in order to protect her. FB did this because otherwise she would have been killed. The show changes that and has FB try to kill Moeka, completely changing the motivation and character of the scene. It takes away a good depth to FB that was present in the game and just gone in the show. It still gave me the absolute saddest scene in the anime though, so there is something good about this change, but honestly, the game did it better. They also added a scene where Mayuri remembers a different world line right near the end and has a talk about how maybe everybody has reading Steiner. I don't remember that from the game, but it does make Ocarina a little bit less special, so I don't know how I feel about it. The biggest change though is one that makes perfect sense. There are no alternate endings. Well, mostly. In the game, you have to undo the demails and they present you with a choice. Do you undo it and hurt the person, taking away from them something important, or do you let them keep it? If you choose not to undo anything, you are shown an ending where you live with your consequences, and these endings are all really good. They help flesh out the character stories and add so much extra emotion to the whole story. It makes the choice to change fate back to the way it was even harder when you have these endings in mind. The show, though, has none of that. As such, the emotional stakes can come across a little bit more shallow. The rushed nature of the second half means less time is spent on these choices, so it just feels a little weaker. I can't stress this enough though, that the show does an amazing job with it all, it's just these stories aren't quite as strong as the novel. In my opinion, the Steins Gate anime is worth it, because the story is still as great as ever. The characters are all memorable and fun, including Daru, the one I hate the most. Even with all the pacing issues, the show hits home by the end and more than makes up for the slower start. The animation is nice, if a little strange at times, and the voice acting is good in Japanese and not bad in English. In fact, some of the translations are better in the English dub than the sub, so take that as you will. But the big question most people have is, should you watch this or should you play the game? Well, that's up to you. Both tell the same story, but the game just has much more detail about everything. It's a lot longer and it has more time to spend on the second half, giving it more emotion, and it does have those alternate endings. It's the same story, but would you rather sit through 10 hours of anime or 30 to 40 hours of game? It's up to you. If you watched the anime and you wanted to see more of the world, then play the game. If you played the game and you wanted to see it animated or in English like I did, or just have a reminder because you haven't played it in years, then watch the anime. They both serve a purpose. So guys, tell me what you thought about this Steins Gate anime. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Was this the introduction to the story for you, or did you play the visual novel first? And if you did start with the show, could you go into the visual novel knowing all the details already, and was it still good? I'm very curious, because I went novel then anime, and so yeah, I just want to know what everybody else did. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.